We look after the health of workers and in the Department of Health, and I run a big compensation fund for about 4 billion rand for ex-mine workers in terms of the problems that they face in building the economy that got us to where we were, including this building. So if you read the plaque, it's a very interesting plaque in terms of where this building comes from, Imoyeni. In terms of what's called the Rand Lords, people that ran the mining industry for a long time in this country. And this ridge is basically part of the Rand Lord Bridge, stretching all the way across into Observatory and on the other side. And on the other side, it's Westcliff. So they overlooked on one side, the northern suburbs, and on the other side, the southern suburbs. But the Rand Lords basically ran things.
And I'm going to be speaking about a play that I wrote and performed. I'm billed on which is called the Museum of Lungs. I'm billed on the program as the creator of, and I just want to put a bit of a disclaimer on that, in that it was very much a collaborative work. I worked with musician Naomi Yanga, who some of you might know, as well as two Egyptians, a director called Leila Solimon and Nancy Monir. And really one of the things we tried to do, and why I want to raise this interdisciplinary work, is that we did try to also very much look at, can we take seriously ideas of music as knowledge? And there's a primacy of the word always, but we try to tell the story both through words, but other parts of the story also through music and through images, and those were all really important things for us. However, I suppose I am to some extent the creator in that the work is based on my story and a personal story. And it was a story of living undiagnosed for many years with tuberculosis. And that I went undiagnosed, in my opinion, was largely a question of how disease is racialized in South Africa. And I think it was easier. The last doctor I went to see, I left in tears after I was basically told that the disease wasn't in my body, it was in my head, and that I was a crazy, hysterical, anorexic white woman. And I'm all those things, but I said, that's not why I've come to see you. Yes, I know that, but that's not the problem. But I then kind of, I suppose, was left with there's something wrong, but I don't know what it is. And that experience for me was a profound experience. I developed a relationship with something that was in my body and that I could sense was in my body, but I had no name for it. And we talked a lot about naming. And I came up with things. I used to call it, my friends I would be saying my creature, the thing, are the kind of terms I was using, because there's a very sense of there is something else living here inside me. And when I was finally diagnosed, that relationship was so profound that when I was told, here's the cure, take it, I kind of find myself asking, do I want to be cured? And do I want to kill this thing that I've lived with now for many, many years and developed a relationship with? And afterwards, I was placed in isolation, and during that period of time, I wrote, and it was an attempt to make sense of what had happened to me, the philosophical questions, and also once I had a name, you have TB, to try to make sense of what that meant in this context. And I find myself digging into my own history and the colonial history, and trying to also ask about my own. One of the very difficult questions and the difficult things to deal with was speaking about my own culpability within this disease. And as a white person in this country, how do I find language to talk about that culpability? Our director read some of the work, and finally I was asked to make a play out of it, and I stupidly said yes, and spent the last year working on the play. We did premiere in Joburg and play in Cape Town, and then we toured in the rest of the continent and also in Europe extensively for the second half of last year. And we've got another 3 short tours, unfortunately all in Europe this year as well.
And today, really what I want to illustrate is, we use this term TB, we speak about this disease, but I don't know if it really sinks in how bad the problem is. Today, as we stand, TB has killed more people than HIV and malaria combined. Yet it's one of the oldest diseases known to humanity, right? Yet we still struggle with it in the modern era of healthcare delivery, simply illustrates that there hasn't been sufficient attention. There isn't enough priority given to solving TB. And where my personal interest lies is in trying to create innovation, useful innovations that we can scale in a country like ours to deal with the TB problem. And so I'm going to give you an example of that today. You've heard a lot earlier in the morning about problems in the healthcare system, problems with drug delivery, problems with getting vaccines. I'm going to try to give you some sense of hope of what we're trying to do here in the country to deal with the problem, but trying to tailor the solutions to something that's particularly South African and a need that's in South Africa. So we have this, the state of the lung. That's the title we've been given. So I thought I'll start with that, the lung. And so what TB is, it's a bacterial disease. Gets transmitted by the sharing of air, and as the bacteria come into an infected lung,
Sorry, I'm just doing it so you can see the whole slide.
Okay, it's fine. Don't worry. We'll get through it. You get the formation, and really, Stacey did a really wonderful job of these holes. You get the formation of these holes in your lung, and eventually these holes lead to what we call complete respiratory insufficiency. You can't breathe because the lung tissue has been destroyed. And that effectively, when you put that into the context of a person who's sick, and we think about how TB is being transmitted, it's those bacteria that then, are sitting in the lungs that then get coughed out. And when we share air, we all breathe the same air, guys. This is not one person's problem. This is the whole country's problem, right? And when we share air, we actually then transmit disease, right? So today I have a simple message for you, is that, in addition to all the problems that you've heard of, that there's a lot of complexity in these bacterial populations, in these TB bacterial populations that we're trying to eliminate in the lungs of infected TB patients, right? And I really want to kind of couch this in this evolving idea of the TB care continuum. So today you've heard about TB, the disease, and a really wonderful rendition of what it means to have TB disease, right? But what you see when we think about TB disease, that's really the end point of an entire sort of continuum of events, It starts off with people getting infected, trying to engage with the healthcare system, getting diagnosed, and then getting put onto treatment. And then hopefully that treatment is curative. That is not always the case. And the outcomes that come from engaging within the healthcare system. And I'm glad that Stacey went before me. Because one of the big things we want to do is find the missing cases. You were not diagnosed. You were missed. And that has actually become a priority from the World Health Organization, and then it's become a national priority. We need to find all these missing cases. And for a couple of reasons. You have all these people who are coughing in the community. And then we also have people who, and Stacey mentioned these too, the people who are what we call latent or sleeping, or people who don't have active disease. But their ability to transmit disease is not known. So we have these people in the community, and if we don't find them, we can't stop transmission. If we don't stop transmission, we will never kill this epidemic, right? So we need to find people, right? We need better diagnostics, and how do we work to getting diagnostics that work in the South African setting, right? And when we think about diagnostics, and there's a lot to talk about, but I'm just going to tell you again the bacterial perspective, right? Let's highlight 3 problems. The first is we have a significant problem with diagnostic pickup. We miss a lot of cases who are in the community, but also cases who come to the clinic, we miss them, because we don't have diagnostics that are sensitive enough, right? And this is people who are living with HIV, and I'll tell you why in a minute, right? Children, we heard a lot about children this morning, right? Around sexual abuse, around children's rights, around universal access to healthcare, but children have been notoriously neglected when it comes to TB.
The first thing is that silicosis is irreversible, it's incurable, it's painful, but very importantly, it is utterly and completely preventable. So the idea that there was a gross miscarriage of justice in causing people to have silicosis is very important to understand from the outset. The second thing is you can only get silicosis from mining. You cannot get it anywhere else. In legal terms, again, this is really important because when you're claiming damages from someone, you have to show that they caused the damage to you. So this is really easy. It's a slam dunk. You can't get it anywhere else. The mines were complicit. TB is a little bit more complicated, and one of the reasons I'll explain at the end why the settlement we achieved is such an achievement is because we got TB included, and the mines were fighting that tooth and nail. So silicosis can take 10 to 15 years after exposure to appear, so it also is a very long time for diagnosis. Many people go undiagnosed. There are not a lot of people who can diagnose silicosis, understand it. It's very hard to detect in the lungs. It can create very severe complications for people. One of the reasons the LRC decided to also really focus on dependents is the impact that it can have on the dependent families. Some people have silicosis and they have radiological silicosis for a long time and it doesn't get any worse. But there are also a lot of people for who it progresses to very bad stages where they need oxygen machines, they have heart failure, they get really incredible back problems. And so they have to be taken care of by their family. And so it's normally the daughters and the mothers that have to give up everything to stay at home and look after them. So for us, the dependence of silicotic miners were also very important. There's a dispute really about how many people we're talking about. We're talking about the whole Southern African region. So it's Botswana, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zimbabwe, and South Africa, Lesotho very much. So, you know, I think Dr. Barry can probably give you some other numbers. We're thinking somewhere around 196,000, but the upper estimate of that is 500,000, but I suppose the settlement will tell us. So the thing about it is that's important as well is that the mining industry has known about silicosis for more than 100 years. They've been warned over and over again. Before the turn of the 19th century, the 20th century, they knew about this. And it's very interesting when you go to the townships and you consult with clients, nobody calls it silicosis. You have to tell them you're talking about titus. They still refer to it either as fetus or titus. They don't talk about silicosis. I had a whole consultation in the Eastern Cape and then they asked me, what are you talking about? And I was like, right, okay, we have to talk about that. But in any event, I'm just listing the commissions there for you. The mining industry has known about this for a very long time. And in fact, there was legislation to manage this throughout the century. And then, of course, what Barry is also important in implementing, and I talk a lot in alphabet soup, so we talk about ODIMWA, it's the Occupational Diseases in Mines and Works Act, and I say LRC for Legal Resources Center, it's a lot of that. So if just put up your hand if I'm saying something that's not clear to everyone. And so the mines were aware of the diseases, and there was actually statutory compensation for it, paid for by the mines, and despite that, up until 2008, there really was not an actual real attempt by the mines to control dust levels. And in fact, in 2008, the Department of Minerals noted that there is a pervasive culture of non-compliance to legislative requirements. As part of the court case, we're assured by the mines that since 2008, things have dramatically changed. And part of the settlement I'll talk about in a bit is that they're saying they think it's unlikely there'll be any future diagnoses of silicosis. We'll have to see. So it takes a long time to diagnose. We won't know for a while. So there was litigation before. So one thing, Barry, is that the LRC is also involved in silicosis. It's not just the dependents. And we actually, in 2004, started the first test case, which was called Blom, or the President Steyn litigation. And that was meant to be a test case. One of the big problems with the mining companies, of course, is that you have to get the information out of them. The silicotic miners don't have the information.
Okay, so what is EWOZA? EWOZA is a collaboration between myself, Anastasia, that's me, in my BSL 3 suits. I feel like I have to put this slide up because people don't believe that I do lab work anymore, but that is actually me, and that's my discipline. In terms of what Chris was talking about yesterday, I'm trained as a molecular microbacteriologist. And I collaborate with a conceptual artist and soon-to-be PhD candidate, Ed Young, to do public engagements and community engagements. So EWOZA has recently developed into sort of 4 key arms, but what I'm going to tell you about first is the core project that's been running since 2014. So the way the project works is we recruit learners from an organization called the Ikamva Youth, and I don't know if people know about the organization, but they're an amazing organization that does extracurricular tutoring. They've got branches all over South Africa, but their first branch was in Makaza, Khayelitsha, and that's where we recruit learners from. They're amazing because they don't choose the most gifted learners from schools. Anyone can join extracurricular lessons, so as long as they attend a certain amount of tutoring. And so we really like this model because it's just about wanting to better your academic marks, and we sort of adhere to that. So we start off with the recruitments and screening, and this acts as a celebration of the previous cohort's films, as well as an advert to recruit new learners to the project. And we also don't recruit based on academics. It's about a willingness to participate and a want to tell stories. We then move into a science workshop phase of the project. And And the science workshops are held at the Institute of Infectious Disease and Molecular Medicine. And I think what's important to mention here is we don't do health information, because there's a lot of groups that do health information really well, and we didn't want to replicate that. So what we want to do is we want to engage young people with biomedical research. And so we do a series of workshops where learners get to do experiments in the lab. So some of the topics are TB basics. So what is TB from a biomedical perspective? What is biomedical research? So generating a hypothesis, how to interpret results. There's a lot of experimentation going on in the labs. And then the IDM also has a lot of internationally leading research groups in terms of TB research in the world. And so we ask these research groups to facilitate workshops. So we do TB drug discovery, TB vaccinology, which is facilitated by the South African TB Vaccine Initiative, who trialed the first new TB vaccine in 100 years. And the vaccine, unfortunately, didn't work. It wasn't protective. But what it did show is that this kind of research can be done in South Africa by local people. So we love that workshop.
Okay, so they have 4 billion rand in unclaimed pensions sitting in Johannesburg, 1.2 billion in my fund unclaimed, and 5 billion rand in Karina's fund, of course, with this new settlement fund. So a mine worker in South Africa is worth 10 billion. But overall, there's 45 billion rand in unclaimed pension and provident funds for 4.2 million workers in South Africa. The money is sitting in Sandton. We've got to find the people and pay them their monies. 100 years ago, Saul Plaatje, and he was a writer. Very, very good colleagues. Secretary General of the ANC. He writes about the lives of mine workers in 1914. 200,000 heroes, by day and by night, laid down their lives to the familiar fall of rock, and were deep levels ranging from 1,000 to 3,000 feet. In the bowels of they had sacrificed their lungs to the rock dust, which developed meningitis and pneumonia. So my act was 1912. ANC was found. There's no party politics. 1912. 2 years later, the Secretary General writes about the lives and livelihoods of mine workers in Kimberley. All right, so thanks to Beth. And I hope this saying from the Health and Safety Executive says, and we're glad, colleague, that unfortunately your comrades died in Kinross. We've had also more recently Lily Mine, etc. So one of the issues that I do in occupational medicine, I've been the entire my life in the public sector. We are saying that workers must be fit for work, fit for life, and definitely fit for tomorrow.